Freezing up when speaking English happens to all of us sometimes. And of course, we try our best to avoid that situation, through practice and learning new skills. But unfortunately, we can never fully avoid it. So that begs the question, what should you actually do when your mind goes blank while speaking in English? Well, today, I'll tell you why this happens, as well as how you can get back on track easily and quickly the next time it happens to you. So let's get cracking. Welcome to the BritSpeakPod, the podcast designed to help you feel more confident when you communicate in English. Hey up, mate. How you doing today? I'm not too bad. Thanks for asking, and welcome to episode 112 of the BritSpeakPod, where we're talking all about what to do when your mind goes blank while you're speaking in English. Now, if you're new around here, my name is Dan. I'm a CELTA-qualified British English teacher and communication coach, and my goal is to help you feel more confident while you're communicating in English. And speaking of feeling more confident, as always, if you go down to the show notes, the description below, there's a link to my free training workshop. It's called Stop Freezing, Start Speaking. And it's designed to get you on the path to feeling more confident while speaking in English. It's totally free, and I'm sure you'll find it useful, so check it out. So let's talk about this problem, right? Freezing up when it's time to speak English. It's your turn to speak. Somebody asks you a question, and you've got good information, but just as you're about to speak, your mind kind of goes blank, and you can't find the words, you can't get started, you can't do anything, and you just kind of stood there like, I don't know what to do. And it sucks, right? Like, it's not cool, and it happens to everybody. It happens to me. It happens to you, probably. It's just a fact of life, right? The real truth is that probably it happens to you more than it happens to me. And we'll talk about why in a bit. But the main thing I want to tell you is that this is totally normal. It happens to everybody, right? So if it happens to you, don't beat yourself up about it. It's going to happen to you. It'll happen to you forever. It's never going to stop. And the thing is like when you accept that it's going to happen, then you start thinking about what to do when it happens rather than trying to avoid it. We can reduce it happening, through practice and certain tools and things that you can learn, but there's always going to be that chance it happens. So we need a recovery plan when that comes up, right? And that's kind of the point of today's lesson. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about what's actually going on, right? And in one word, freezing up or your mind going blank while you're speaking in English happens because of overwhelm. Think about it. Speaking in English requires a lot of cognitive processes in your brain to happen at the same time. And I'm not just talking the basic ones, finding the right word, pronouncing it correctly, and putting it in a sentence that makes sense, right? That requires thought. But there's also a much higher level of processing that's happening on top of that, right? And I'm going to go through some of the more intense stuff. So you've got complex ideas and nuanced thoughts in your head, right? And usually you take those very complex things and you put them through your first language, where you've got a lot of experience doing that. You've got far better control over the language. And sometimes that is even difficult in your own language. Now add the complexity of translating that through a second language or a third language or fourth language, whatever your English is. That is very, very intensive for your brain to do. Because not only have you got these really high-level ideas and they're very nuanced, you've also got to deal with your language ability to express those ideas. And maybe you've got to adapt them. Maybe you've got to change them based on what you're able to communicate. That is very, very intense for your brain. On top of that, we've probably got some layer of perfectionism happening. For most people, me too. It's a secret, but it happens to me too, Perfectionism where, you want to put across your best English, right? You want to use your fancy vocabulary and your complex grammar, and you want to appear really smart and intelligent. So you spend a lot of time searching for the perfect word, not any word, the perfect word. And you put that in the most complex pattern you can. Not the simple one that works, the most complex one because that looks impressive and that's going to make people think that you're more intelligent and better at English and you're going to feel better about yourself and hooray, I did it perfectly. Now, as I've said a million times, perfectionism's not real. It's just a trap that keeps you stuck. But it happens to all of us, whether we like it or not. We have to kind of try and silence that voice in the back of our head a little bit. But that's something that's also happening while you're trying to process this stuff, right? You also got a layer of fear, probably. You're probably scared of being judged by the other person. You're probably scared that your accent is making you hard to understand. You're probably scared that you're going to make a mistake or that you're going to be misunderstood. And all of that stuff is incredibly intensive for your brain, on top of the processing that you're already doing. And all this is happening in real time. So, of course, your brain is going to get overwhelmed. Of course it is. It's just biology, right? And I talk about this in a lot of episodes of this podcast, but I never really talk about the biological aspect of this because this is not theoretical. It's biological. It's physical, what's happening, right? So I'm going to try my best. I'm not a scientist, and I didn't even do well at school in science, but I'll try my best to explain as I understand it, right? So when you're under pressure, not just, intellectual pressure like this, any kind of pressure, your brain has got like an alarm system that can be triggered. And when it triggers, it's what's known as amygdala hijack, right? And I don't want to get too into the specifics, but basically, this alarm system, it floods your brain with cortisol, which is a chemical, right? And then basically, it shuts down the front part of your brain. And that front part of your brain is responsible for complex thoughts and language, right? The prefrontal cortex, as it's called. Now, when your brain gets really overwhelmed, it kind of triggers this alarm system. And then this alarm system kind of, as a way of self-defense, shuts down the prefrontal cortex, the front of your brain, which usually deals with the language. So suddenly, that part of the brain doesn't work anymore. That's what causes this freeze, right? So the solution isn't, try harder. Like, that just makes the overload more, right? So what is a better option is to have recovery techniques. Then the recovery technique will kind of reset your brain and turn the alarm system off so things can go back to normal, right? And we can do that in a bunch of ways. We're going to talk about what it is. But that's basically what's happening on a biological level, right? Now, what you'll find as well is this happens to everybody, but it especially happens to what I like to call competent learners. So people who are usually upper intermediate to advanced rather than beginners, and people that use English in professional settings. Maybe, you're a doctor or you're a CEO or, you work in some kind of professional capacity with English, and your ability in English is directly tied to your performance in your job sometimes, right? Because not only have you got all of that overwhelm from before, you also have the ability to understand your own skill. You have the ability to monitor yourself and worry about your own English. And you worry about how your English is being received by the other person. Think about that as a cognitive thing. You are able, while you're speaking, to think about what you're saying and how the other person might be receiving it. That is so many extra processes and extra tasks that are happening and extra stress on your brain, which is already overwhelmed. And when this happens, we see three main things. The first is hesitation. You can't get started, or you freeze up mid-sentence. You lose track of what you wanted to say, or you pause while you think about the next thing you're going to say. You hesitate, right, in a word. And it happens, right? The other thing that often happens is people ramble. They just start speaking and they've got no structure and they just say the first thing that comes to their head and they keep talking and they keep talking and they give really unclear answers, but at least they said something, right? And that's fine, but it often leads to misunderstandings or they go into defense mode, right? And they'll just stick to really short answers, maybe one or two words, which allows you to avoid the overwhelm and it'll achieve a goal. You'll answer a question, right? But you don't get to show your real abilities or your real thoughts or your real opinions, or you don't get to provide the value that you know you've got inside, right? And that's not nice. That's kind of the worst thing, because you'll sit there later and you'll think, oh my God, I couldn't even answer that basic question, or I couldn't explain what I really wanted to say, or there's no way they could understand what I was talking about. It was just nonsense. And then you're going to beat yourself up and your confidence goes down, and then you're back to square one, which is not cool. So what I want to talk about next is what to actually do when this happens to you, right? So basically what we need to do is come up with a way that you can recover as quickly as possible. You can turn off the alarm system in your brain, and then you can get back on track and start speaking like you can. The first thing is biological. It's very simple. You need to take a breath, right? You need to take one slow, long, but silent breath. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Now, this gives you a couple of seconds, but also it's a calming technique. It's used for people who have panic attacks and things like this, because it sends a direct signal to your brain that you're safe. Your amygdala that we were talking about earlier, it tells it, look, we're safe. We're not in danger. Turn that alarm off. And that brings your prefrontal cortex back online so you can start processing language. Without doing this, you're not going to be able to do anything else. You got to turn that alarm off first. So one slow, deep, long breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. Got to be done first, right? Now, after you've done that, there are a couple of more intellectual things that you can do, okay? The first is to buy time with recovery expressions. Sometimes we just need a couple of seconds to organize our thoughts, right? Sometimes we just need, 2 to 3 seconds so I can process, put everything in order, and then start speaking, right? Now, a lot of people will do this by just either sitting in silence, which is a bit weird. Maybe I'll think something's wrong. Like if I ask you a question, you're silent for 5 seconds. My first thought is like, are you okay? Did you hear what I said? And we want to avoid that. But we also don't want to be like, because that will make you seem like you're not confident. And it can, I do it sometimes, but if you do it all the time, it becomes a bit too much, and it's going to kind of deal with that judgment thing that we talked about. You're going to come across as slightly less intelligent. So we want to try and avoid that as well. So what do we do? Well, there's a bunch of things in English called recovery expressions or hesitation expressions, right? For example, you ask me a question and I need a couple of seconds to think. I can't sit in silence and I can't sit there being like, So what I could say is something like, you know what? That's a really interesting question, actually. Now, I don't necessarily think it's an interesting question, but I've memorized that expression and I can just say it without thinking, which means I can use the time while I'm saying that expression to think about what I want to actually say, So, that's a really interesting question. Now, in the 2 seconds it took me to say that, I was processing information in my brain, right? You could also say something like, you know what? This is quite complex. Let me think about that for a second. Tell them that you're going to take a second or two to think. There's nothing wrong with that. But let them know. Don't make them guess. You know what I mean? So, let me think about that for a second. And then take 1 or 2 seconds to think about what you want to say, and off you go, right? One of my favorite strategies is to repeat the question. And there's a few ways to do this. You can repeat the question like you're thinking. Yeah, what do I think about that? But in a more professional situation, maybe it can be something like, so if I understand correctly, you're asking me about whatever the question was about, right? And in that time, you can then process your thoughts, right? It comes across as though you're clarifying what you understood, but actually you understood it, you're just giving yourself a bit of extra time, right? So it's kind of a trick of the trade, if you like. So those kind of things, buy time with recovery expressions. There's a bunch of them, and there's a bunch of different ones for different situations, but, learn a couple of those, okay? Now, another thing that will often happen when your brain gets overwhelmed is words will go missing, You'll be halfway through a sentence and then you realize, oh, I don't know that word or I've forgotten that word. And then you panic because what are you supposed to do, right? Well, if you're ever in a situation where there's a missing word, right? Don't give up, don't stop, and definitely don't pause the conversation to look it up on your phone. Don't do that. You've got to talk around a missing word. And this is a skill that can be practiced. I often practice it with people inside of my coaching programs, right? But basically, you've got to find a way to deliver that word without using that word, okay? And a few strategies that usually work. You can describe it, it looks like this, it's kind of like that, generalize, it's a type of blah, blah, blah. Give an example, you use it when you want to cut something like paper. Now you can even use gestures, it's like this, you use it like this, and you can show people with your hands or whatever. So if you're ever in a situation where you don't know a word, just try to explain it in a different way. Describe what it is, what it does, what it looks like. Generalize it. What kind of thing is it? Give an example of when or how it works and use gestures to show it as much as you can, right? Those things will help you deliver the message, and you'll find that people you're speaking to, especially native speakers, are pretty good at guessing what you're trying to say. So that's really good. Now, that's in the short term. Things that you can do to help you exactly when it happens. But also we want to try and avoid it happening in the future, right? And that's where you need to really focus on speaking practice, right? I'm talking consistency. We're not talking for like hours and hours a week. 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day is more than enough, right? And the reason we do this is we want to build muscle memory. We want to make sure that these expressions, these hesitation expressions, are automatic. We want to practice being able to talk around missing words. So when it happens, we know what to expect, right? And we want to practice being able to respond quickly to whatever might happen. And we do this through speaking practice. Now, there's no specific practice I'd recommend because there's a bunch of different practice you can do for a bunch of different things. But generally, things like summarizing, read a text and then summarize it in 2 to 3 sentences in your own words in real time. Find a picture, describe it. Or look out of the window. What can you see? Describe it. Using online prompts to get a question that you respond to immediately. Go to conversationstarters.com, click new prompt, whatever it comes up with on the screen, respond to it within 2 to 3 seconds, right? These kind of activities will build that muscle that will keep you on track when things go wrong, okay? Like, it can be hard to know what to practice. I mean, one of the things that I offer to people is like a 30-day speaking Kickstarter. And it's basically 30 days of speaking practice exercise like that. So you don't have to worry about what you're going to study or how to study. I literally show you what to do, give you the materials, show you an example, and then you just do it, right? So it takes all the guesswork out of it. But you don't need that course. I mean, it's there, but you don't need it. You can do whatever you like. But that consistent speaking practice is going to reduce the stress because you've built those muscles. So your brain is less likely to get overwhelmed, which means you're less likely to freeze up, okay? So yeah, that's basically the point of today's topic, right? Yeah, it sucks when your mind goes blank, but you can deal with it. You can get around it. You can find ways to deal with it when it happens. It's going to require certain things, some of them biological, some of them intellectual, some of them practice-based. But by doing those things, you can make sure that when it happens to you, you're prepared, right? And that means you're not going to be as scared in a conversation, so you're going to feel more confident. And the funny thing about confidence is it comes from showing yourself that you can deal with certain things. If you freeze up in a conversation and you can't deal with it, it hurts your confidence. If you go into that situation and you're able to continue, you're able to navigate that problem and come out the other side without any damage, that shows yourself that, oh, I can do it. That's how confidence is built, right? And that's kind of the point. So yeah, and if you really don't know where to get started with any of this, I am here to help. I've got a bunch of different ways that I can help you. The first one I'd recommend, the link in the description, the Stop Freezing, Start Speaking workshop. It'll go through a lot of more in-depth, like why this happens, and it'll go through what to do and some frameworks and things like that you can learn to make life easier for yourself. Like I said, I've also got like courses and coaching and stuff like that. If you're interested, there's links in the description to all that kind of stuff. So check it out. But I just want you to know, yeah, this happens. Yeah, it sucks, but you can handle it, mate. You can do it. I believe in you. So yeah, try some of the stuff in this episode and hopefully it works out. But that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back again on another one really soon. But until then, look after yourself, mate. See you there.